The Bayonetta series is one of the first complete game series I played when I got back into gaming after finishing the Ori series. I really didn't know what to think. I remember seeing the trailer and all the hype around Bayonetta 3 when it was being released back in 2022. I had a huge case of FOMO and didn't want to miss out, so I actually pre-ordered the game and went out and picked up the first two physically on the Switch. I wanted to be prepared for the release of number 3, so I got into playing the first one. At the time of recording this video, it's actually my second time playing the game, but it's almost been 2 years. So it was actually kind of nice to revisit the game and make a review for it. Anyways, let's talk about Bayonetta. But before we get into it, don't forget to drop a like on the video if you enjoy it. Check out my channel for some other reviews, which can range from 100% reviews all the way to getting that sweet platinum trophy. Comment any games that you want to see me review. I already have a long list of backlogged games, but feel free to drop a few down there for me. And don't forget to subscribe, it really helps me out. Honestly, the story for Bayonetta is super vague and confusing at the beginning of the game, since nothing is really described and told in a straightforward way. I mean, at the start of the game, you're falling from a clock tower, fighting off angels with someone you probably assume is your friend, but then you immediately get thrown into the first level where you'll be fighting off angels in a cemetery. You'll start to gather information as you progress that Bayonetta has no idea who she is, where she is, or why she was found at the bottom of a lake. But then as you get further, you also have Luca chasing Bayonetta around because I guess she killed his father when he discovered her in the lake, which Luca witnessed. All of this is going on, but Bayonetta is not only trying to discover who she truly is, but you're also looking for a treasured jewel. But also Bayonetta is being guided and spoken to by a heavenly voice during the whole ordeal, which is also trying to assist and lead you to a treasured jewel, which you will later find out is considered the eyes of the world. The game is broken down into roughly 18 chapters that you'll be able to complete, where you will ultimately have to fight a final boss at the end. To be completely honest, I absolutely love the story for this game. I'm not exactly the biggest fan of how the setup was, especially during my first playthrough of the game. Honestly, you gotta have some pretty decent deduction skills to try to piece together the backstory by yourself. But if you manage to make it through the game and meet all of the other characters, or even just get more of a grasp on the main story when it's broken down as you get further in, you're really gonna enjoy this one. Although it can be confusing at first, it really does pull itself together to make complete sense. I even enjoyed how they managed to tie this game into the future games. I definitely think this is one you should enjoy for yourself. The world building for Bayonetta will primarily be taking place between the 3 different realms, which include Paradiso, the realm of the angels, Inferno, the realm of the infernal demons, and lastly the human world, which is actually trapped between the 2 worlds. You'll be traveling throughout a town, which I'm not even going to attempt to say the name because I'm going to butcher it, which is said to be extremely close to Paradiso. However, as you play the game and face off against the different enemies, you will be traveling throughout the world of Paradiso and progressing through there to get certain objectives. The game does a fantastic job at including their idea of how Paradiso is and how it affects the human world. As you progress, you will be making your way to the church where you will eventually face off against the final boss. The world itself is well put together. It's extremely linear and doesn't really leave much room for exploring. However, you are able to branch off and find some things that you consider hidden, which can sometimes be different busts for Bayonetta to find. You will end up revisiting some areas within the game, especially during some of the boss fights. And you get to spend some significant time in Paradiso, which was pretty enjoyable since you can see how their idea of paradise can have a menacing side to it. Bayonetta is pretty unique when it comes to characters within the game. It ends up introducing all these different characters throughout the game and expects you to know who they are and what importance they have. Honestly, if you've never played a Bayonetta game before, or even one of the spin-offs, you really won't understand half of the references the game tries to pull. This makes complete sense though, since you're essentially playing Bayonetta who essentially lost her memories and has no recollection of anything. But Bayonetta is a super fun main character. She never feels rushed or unfinished. The story behind her as you progress the game is extremely well thought out. Rodin is one of the main side characters within this game. The owner of the Gates of Hell bar has a wild backstory. Formerly being known as the angel in charge of creation as he ruled over Paradiso, was eventually exiled and spent time in Inferno until he eventually decided he would spend his time in the human world opening up a bar. Rodin is also a weaponsmith and he is extremely curious how his weapons will be panned out and handled while Bayonetta is using them. Some of the other side characters within the game, like I said before, they're kind of hard to understand who they are or what relevance they play, but overall each one of them plays a pretty vital role to the main story. Characters like Luca or Cereza leave you wondering who they are at first, but the game does do a pretty good job at explaining who they are as you progress further into it. But that's what makes it way more fun, that mystery or confusion of who these people are. Overall, the game has a great cast of characters who really contribute to the main story and allow for it to be played out and produced in an even better experience. Even the final boss's character was extremely interesting, and it allows for an interesting boss fight towards the end. You will be facing off against a massive amount of different enemies within this game that have a ton of variety to them. A general overlook though is you'll be facing off against Paradiso angels. When you face off against the angels of Paradiso, there is a hierarchy that comes with how strong they are. Towards the beginning of the game, you'll be facing off against enemies from the 3rd sphere, and as they get stronger, they will come from the 2nd sphere and 1st. I won't dive too deep into the hierarchy since each sphere has 3 ranks to it, and it would take me a little bit to explain all of the different enemies. But after the 3 spheres, you will get into the cardinal virtues, which are essentially most of the boss enemies within this game. There's so much variety when it comes to enemies, there is almost something new introduced at all times. The game does a fantastic job at introducing new enemies continuously throughout the main story. It honestly felt like for the first 7 to 8 chapters, each mission has 1 to 2 new enemies always being introduced introduced. They really did a great job at keeping the enemies within this game feel fresh and new. Another thing I really enjoyed was how they introduced each of the enemies, allowing for each of them to have their own introduction, allowing for each one of them to be introduced in a unique and individual style. The boss fights within this game are super fun and have a lot going for them. You'll have a few different major boss fights throughout the main story, as well as a few mini bosses. The bosses themselves are super unique, and almost all the fights have QTE segments within them. And nowadays I wouldn't be the biggest fan of QTE, but for this game it actually does work super well. On the harder difficulties, the boss fights can provide a decent challenge. You won't be completely demolishing them. Most of the boss fights will take some time because most of the bosses have extremely massive HP pools. Even though this game had a pretty cool boss fight at the end, personally I thought the boss fight in chapter 7 was the best one. You'll be facing off against the cardinal virtue of temperance, who will be controlling the weather and causing a massive tornado to be going during the fight. I just enjoyed having to dodge hits while scaling the boss, all while jumping on the debris that was flying around during the tornado. Although the final boss fight is pretty cool, I'm not really going to spoil anything and talk about that. I think that's something you should experience for yourself. All the boss sequences really just have a unique feel to them, and even playing this game almost 2 years later, I still had just as much fun with them. So I won't be spending too much time talking about the combat for this game. Since there really isn't much to it, you will have access to either weapons in Bayonetta's hands or her feet. You are able to equip the same weapons to both hands and feet, or have two completely different weapons. You'll be performing different combination attacks to dish out the most damage against enemies. If you manage to do perfect dodges, you can trigger Bayonetta's Witch Time, which will slow down time and allow you to dish out some major damage. If you ever played a game like Devil May Cry, similar to that, you will also be graded on your performance in combat at the end of every combat sequence, which will affect the overall performance at the end of the chapter and will decide what type of trophy you will receive. Other than that, the combat is pretty simple, and honestly, it is so simple you could get by with just button mashing and dodging, but that's what made it so enjoyable. During the main story, you'll be collecting different weapons as you progress. Most of them will be collected by gathering different records, and once you have collected the entire record, you can turn it into Rodin, who will use that record to invite a demon and essentially will turn their soul into a weapon for Bayonetta to use. There are roughly 12 different weapons you'll be able to collect as you progress throughout the game, if I manage to count them correctly at least. You are also able to pick up and use different weapons from fallen angels if you manage to beat them. You are also able to purchase different equipment from Rodin at the Gates of Hell, which include different techniques and special treasures, as well as different items which can assist Bayonetta in combat by increasing her attack, or even an item that can heal her. Personally, I didn't really find myself purchasing too many items. I didn't really find them too necessary to help in combat. I know I didn't mention it before, but you will also be collecting halos off of enemies from Paradiso and using those halos to trade a Rodin to purchase different items to use. The price of the game on Steam is $19.99, and I think the game is completely worth that price. It has about an 8 to 10 hour main story depending on how much side content you decide to do. The game provides a solid level of difficulty on the higher levels. The characters are pretty fun and enjoyable. The combat is super enjoyable and can be mind-numbing fun that you don't even need to think about. The graphics aren't perfect, but for a game that was originally released in 2009, it still looks good. I think the game definitely proves that it's worth that $20 price tag. Well, that's my review of Bayonetta. I did originally play this game on the Switch, but I am considering picking it up on Steam to 100%. Will I actually do it? Maybe. I don't know. I haven't decided. There's so many other games to play right now. But anyways, thanks for watching the video if you did. If you enjoyed my content, feel free to check out my other reviews. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, comment any other games that you want to see me review, and hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.